Thank you for being here. Really appreciate your presence, and I appreciate your feedback, and I appreciate your comments. And I hope that I'll give you a little bit more of an opportunity to make comments and excuse me. Teaching this class really chokes me up, so I have to use my cough drops. Uh, we're talking tonight about anxiety, and those of you who have been here, uh, hmm, that's what I meant. We did anxiety last week, although we're going to do a couple of more little quick things about anxiety tonight, but mostly about depression tonight. I passed a sign-up sheet around the first 2 weeks, and I realize some of you are here who may not have been here when this was going around. So most of you have already signed up. This is a little email blog post that I send out. I usually say I send it out every 2 or 3 weeks, but I confess that it's been several weeks since I've sent anything out, and we're going to get all of you added to the mailing list, and I plan to send one out Friday. It's almost written, but I've got to get y'all added to the list so that you will know about it too. Anyway, if anybody has not signed this and would like to be added to the email list, please write your names and email addresses and signatures, just what it asks for there, and we'll get you added. Our theme, just to recap, is about brain science. The title of the series is Transformed Thinking, and it really is that simple. It's a lesson series in how we can transform our thinking. You know, the Bible has been telling us this for centuries, and so, you know, Paul says in Romans 12, don't be conformed to this world, but be transformed. We're told that we do have the mind of Jesus. We have to cultivate that, but we have capacities in our heads. We have a brain that is unparalleled in the world, in the animal world, in the world, and we know that we don't access as much of it as we can. But this is specifically spiritually parts of our brain that we can use, we can access, and if we know how. So there's a lot about brain science, neural networks, and brain plasticity we've talked about. Our mantra in the class is we cannot control the thoughts that come into our minds. So we're driving our cars, or we're talking over lunch, or we're watching TV or listening to the radio. We're seeing signboards. Thousands of images and messages bombard our minds every day. We can't control what comes into our mind, but we absolutely can control what stays in our mind. And so I read it said a different way this week, that first thoughts are not of our choosing. Second thoughts are of our choosing. It's the same thing that we've been talking about. First thoughts just come. They don't have to stay. We can choose to allow them to stay, or we can choose to replace them with other thoughts. So, as I just said, we do have the mind of Christ, and it must be cultivated. I want to just mention a couple of additional thoughts about anxiety that I didn't have time to mention last week. One is that have you ever considered going on a news fast? I had a really good friend a few years ago. He was a psychiatrist. He's passed away now. But I don't know, 20 years ago, he said, I tell just about all of my patients, we know what's going to be on the evening news. You know it before it comes on, because it was on last night and the night before that. We know that there's going to be news about wars and terrorism and death and famine, natural disasters, and more and more and more. His question is really simple. Why do you want that to be the last information that you put into your head before you go to sleep? I don't. I haven't watched the evening news in years, and I haven't missed it. I still know what's going on in the world, more or less. I know probably as much as I want to know. So it's not like being in denial, but I don't want those things to be the last images and the last thoughts that go into my head before I lay me down to sleep. Okay, so consider a news fast. You may remember this next video. It is in the form of a commercial a few years ago. The title of the video is Prized Possession. So this character, this creature, has a prized possession, and it gives him all kinds of anxiety. Okay?
Trouble, 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 trouble. Trouble been dogging my soul since the day I was born. Worry, 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 worry. Worry just will not seem to leave my mind alone. Worry, oh, worry, 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 worry. Sometimes I swear it feels like this worry is my only friend.
When it comes to things you care about, leave nothing to chance. Travelers, insurance for auto, home, and Travelers, insurance for auto, home,
See, I don't know about you. I can identify with that guy. All right? So all you need is a good insurance policy, and then you don't have anything to be anxious about anymore. But I always liked that video. I wanted to share it with you. It's about how we manage our thoughts. It's not always what's going on in our lives, because even people with job problems can have anxiety or cannot have anxiety. People who are in difficult relationships don't necessarily have to live with anxiety. It's about how we manage our thoughts. And so tonight, as you reminded me, we're talking about managing depression. And it's just striking to me how that this is a topic that is pulled from our headlines today and from our headlines last week. Police unsure of why two Plano-East friends apparently took their own lives. Experts warn of effects the news can have. It's really, really close to home, And people, everybody knows somebody who's depressed. But when something like this happens, someone taking their own lives, and especially young people, it's so shocking, it's so overwhelming. I want to give us a chance to discuss in just a few minutes what might we do, what might we be able to do, because some of you remember the teenage suicides that happened in Plano, 20 years ago, 25 years ago? It was a long time ago. And there's definitely the possibility of a copycat effect. And some people will say, now, when one teenager takes her own life, it kind of demystifies the process. It may make it easier for somebody else who's been thinking about that, to take their own life. This is from today's newspaper. Dallas turns out to pay tribute to Rusty Rose. Some of you are familiar with Rusty Rose. He was a former partner in the Texas Rangers ownership when George W. Bush was ownership. And he's been around a long time. The top of the article in this morning's Dallas Morning News says that Rusty Rose was killed by the demons of depression that had haunted him for decades. So he apparently took his own life. Apparently the Plano East girls took their own lives. So I'm going to pause here for just a minute and get a little bit of comment from you about, okay, we come in contact with other people, other adults, teenagers, children. What can we do? What can we do not just in the aftermath, and there's a lot of stuff we can do in the aftermath of this kind of tragedy, but what can we do to maybe even prevent additional tragedies like this from taking place? I welcome your thoughts and your comments on that, or your questions on that.
I came out of high school at the time it was happening last, and between the suicide and the heroin in Plano, I came out of Richardson schools, but they're our neighbors.
Right.
And I lost a friend out of it as well, and he decided to blow his head off with a shotgun. And the next guy that I ran into, I didn't know anything about it. It had already happened, I guess, when I found out. And the next guy that I ran across, I just let him know that suicide is not the answer. It is a permanent fix to a temporary solution.
Or temporary problem.
That's
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That was basically it. He and I disconnected, but I know that he did not do it right then.
Right.
And I don't know if once you go down that path, are you ever free from it?
It's a good question.
It's
a good question.
I don't know. I don't know what happened to that particular guy. But it was very sad to watch for all of us being such impressionable youth.
Oh yeah.
Coming out of
Oh yeah.
here we are, 18. We're getting cars. We're making college plans. So on and so forth. And actually, there was a second friend that committed suicide at the same time. Found he wasn't going to graduate. So just 2 of 5 that I lost, and then about 2.5 years coming out of high school that really made me think about how I was going to live my life. Now, I still did crazy things, but I tried to do it a little bit smarter than I did.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks for sharing that. It makes a deep. You'll never forget the things that you've shared with us. Thanks for doing it. Who else?
A question: does God forgive them for committing suicide?
Well, what's the answer to this? Above my pay grade. My belief about that is that it's such a complex set of circumstances, and I don't think any two are exactly alike. But I think also about God and forgiveness that a lot of times He's much more forgiving than we are. He can forgive a lot of things that we may have trouble forgiving other people for. And so God knows what He's doing. He knows you better than you know you. He knows me better than I know me. And He knows Rusty Rose better than he knowed himself, better than he knew himself. And so I think that's the way that I choose to do that, is to trust God that He's got things well taken care of, well in hand, insofar as the judgment is concerned, as far as everything is concerned. Yes.
So, in your practice and stuff, how many people have you run into that have come out as depressed, but nobody around them even knows it?
Yeah.
I mean, think about it. You ask us, how can we help? And there are people
That's right.
you would never know.
That's right.
They just keep it in.
And that's exactly part of the challenge, part of the problem. My experience with depressed people is that, and people who have considered suicide, that they have shared with me, at that moment, they honestly believe there's no other way out. They are confident, they're sure that there's no other way out. And so what we try to do as therapists, as professionals, first of all, connection. And that's one of the things that everybody can do, because a lot of people who take this route feel as if they're totally disconnected from anybody and everybody. Nobody really cares, and most of the time they're not. They're mistaken about that. So we connect. Another thing that we do is we get them to talk. We get them to open up. Tell me about it. And one of the things we do in our office, and I'm not hesitant to ask the question: have you thought about suicide? Have you ever considered suicide? Have you ever attempted suicide? Tell me about that. And there's some really, I think anybody can ask those questions. We're going to talk about some of the diagnostic criteria for depression here in just a few minutes. But if you see somebody, you know what simple question I ask sometimes? Person sitting in my office is, do you feel depressed? Do you feel depressed? And you can tell. You can usually tell by the way they look, the way they sit, the way they stand, the way they talk. So if you feel depressed, tell me about it. Do you mind telling me about it? Do you mind telling me a little bit more about it? What's going on with that? And even in that little connection, somebody can feel as if you really care, and maybe they've got somebody they can talk to about it later, tomorrow, next week, or whatever. A couple of other hands were up. Yes.
Jesus gave us the example of being the good shepherd. And although we may not be the person to intensely counsel them about it, but we can help shepherd them to get them to somebody.
Yeah.
I mean, Jesus says we go after, he's the example. He went after the one and left the 99.
Yeah.
So staying, like you said, open
Yeah,
to
the one
dialogue.
the one was disconnected.
Yes.
Yeah, and so he had to actively go out.
Dialogue is
Yeah.
so important, letting them, that lets them know you care.
And don't sell yourself short, because there are people who will talk to you who will never talk to me or somebody like me, who will never make that contact. And so you can do that. And I'm just saying, don't be embarrassed, don't be shy to ask questions, to ask very direct questions. And if they don't want to answer the questions, okay, you're not any worse off, and they may not be any worse off than they were to begin with. Greg, did you have your hand?
Yeah, I have a thought if there are no questions. So if someone has that belief, and as you stated, that is a belief they have, it's true in their mind.
And a lot of times they run it over and over and over again in their minds, just as we've talked about in previous lessons.
They've reinforced it. It's a true belief. How do you shake that belief? Or do you just build rapport to get them to open up and move on?
Well, I don't think I finished what I started to say a minute ago. You build rapport, you keep them talking, because the general theory now is that most people who are considering suicide, that it's a temporary thought. Now, they may have thought about it over and over again, but that real impulse to do something, to act on it, is going to pass if we can keep them engaged and keep them connected with us. That doesn't mean it won't come back later, but that's one of the things that everybody can do. Think about disconnection and connection. If there's any way you can connect with somebody, somebody who's in high school, somebody who goes to high school in Plano, and this guy or girl may not have ever thought about this, but ask, hey, what do you think? What do you think about? Did you know the girls? Did you know the girls who took their own lives? What do you think about that? What does that mean to you? Engage them in conversation. They may want to talk about it and not feel like they've got an outlet for it, or they may not, but they're not going to be worse off, and you're not going to be worse off if you have a conversation about it that they might not have had with anybody previously. Here first.
My opinion of this, as someone who has come back from that, the pain is so great, it's not explainable to someone else. The beauty of that, the relief of death, is more beautiful than anything. And it's almost virtually impossible to explain that to someone.
I really appreciate you saying that. Thank you for sharing that. I'm going to share something on a much more minor level that I experienced several years ago. But I agree that somebody who's not been clinically depressed, I don't think can fully understand clinical depression.
And the other thing is, I've heard people all my life comment on the fact that that's the most selfish thing you can do. I promise you, when you are ill enough to contemplate that, to try it,
Yeah.
you don't have a selfish thought in your mind. Your thought is that all the people connected to you are better off.
That's right.
Without your problem.
You said it exactly right. Thanks again for sharing that. Very, very personal. I know. Thank you. Connie?
Well, I'd like for you to speak a little bit about the difference in what is perceived to be depression, but is really sadness over an experience of right now. Because this man suffered with bipolar and depression all of his life, tried many different medications, none of which were effective for him. And listening to this woman speak, you can imagine that must have been his perception, that if I remove myself from the family that he has caused pain for, things will be
Everybody's going to be better off. That's the belief system. And I'm going to you've been reading ahead in my notes, and I'm going to get there in just a couple of minutes. Let's take one more comment. Yes.
Is the dynamics of a person who kills their whole family and then kills himself. I've often thought, I wish they'd have done the other way around, kill themselves first. But I just was wondering about that.
That's a whole another animal. That's far different from depression and suicide. Although some depression may be involved in that, there are also some really big bad emotional disorders that are involved in that too. And so I think it's important to differentiate what we're talking about tonight from that set of problems. And it's a complex set of problems. Thank you very much for your comments. As I mentioned, there's something happened to me a long time ago, and it happened for a very, very brief period of time, and I'll share that with you in just a few minutes, and we'll go through a couple of other things to get there. But it made an indelible impression on my life. So, just quickly, some of the incidents of depression. Everybody here knows somebody. Everybody here knows somebody who has been deeply depressed, and you may know people who have actually taken their own lives. But depression affects millions of people, literally, and keeping them from living normal and healthy and happy lives. The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention estimates that 10% of Americans at some time in their life suffer from this disorder. The following groups have the highest risk for depression, and I don't even know why some of these are. But again, from the CDC, highest risk groups are middle-aged adults between the ages of 45 and 64. Can I see a show of hands, please? Not for people who are depressed, but are in that age range. The only reason I don't raise my hand is because I'm beyond that age range now. So I guess I'm free. But I don't know why that is. But middle-aged adults between the ages of 45 and 64. Females have a much higher incidence of depression than males. Maybe because they have to live with males. And I just, a little comic relief, but I'm not making light of the thing. African Americans and Hispanics have higher incidences of depression. And then people who are unable, physically or emotionally unable to work, or who are chronically unemployed. Now that one may make more sense than some of the others. When we want to work and we are unable for any number of reasons, then that takes some, I think what we perceive, takes some value away from us and away from our lives. Depression is classified as a mood disorder, and so in the diagnostic manuals you'll find depression under the category of mood disorders. But one really, really important thing I want you to remember, and I've mentioned this, I think mentioned it each time that we've been here, that we know more about emotional and mental disorders. Remember this: mental illness is medical illness. It doesn't mean that we have the kinds of medications that are going to help everybody with every disorder, but we know enough now by our technology, by our scanning technology, neuroscience, we know enough to know that mental illness is medical illness. It's like diabetes, it's like osteoarthritis, it's like a lot of things that we take medication for because we feel better when we take the medication, and we don't feel as good when we don't take the medication. But a mood disorder affects a person both mentally and physically. Our thoughts and our feelings are altered. I heard it explained years ago that being depressed is like looking at the world through a dark veil. A veil is hanging down in front of your face, and you are unable to see the world accurately. Everything looks darker. Beautiful sunny day today. If you're looking through a dark veil, it looks darker than it really is. People look darker, metaphorically, than they really are. Relationships seem darker than they really are when you're looking through that veil of depression. And so the person is really not able to function normally. They feel empty and alone and separated. So keep that in mind. Disconnection and separation is one of the most common persistent themes in depression. And it may not be accurate. The person who's depressed may be surrounded by loving family and friends. So technically, they're not alone, but they can't see it that way. They can't feel it, and they don't believe it. They believe that they are empty and alone and separated. So
That's exactly what you said.
say that again, I'm sorry.
It is exactly what you said. They're separated, but the other people do not understand. They have not been
Right.
in that. You can't connect
Right.
with someone.
And they really do love you. I mean,
They can tell. My mother stood right by my bed and said, "I love you more than anything. You have to get up. You have a 6-year-old daughter." And I'm thinking, I feel like Henny Penny and the sky is falling. And this woman's crazier than me. She's telling me I've got to get up and take care of somebody
yeah,
else.
what's wrong with her, right?
Huh?
Thank you. Yeah, but it is. That's exactly what it is. And so I think those of us who don't struggle with clinical depression have got to make a decision. This is one of those choices we make, that I'm going to accept the truth of this situation, the truth that's told to me, even though I don't get it, and I can't really put myself in that place. I'm going to accept that is her or his reality at that moment, and I'm going to treat them accordingly. Yes?
I was just going to say, I think in the church, there's such a stigma, because I suffered with depression almost all my adult life, and there's such a stigma that, like, well, you need to get in the Word and you need to pray more, and it's like something you're doing wrong, and you were living your life the way you should be, And I've had people say stuff
Yeah.
like that to me.
That's on page 5 or 6.
I'm sorry.
No, you're the voice of experience, and I appreciate that very, very much. And I don't want to say anything except I think as a church, generally speaking, Christianity, especially maybe conservative Christianity, historically we haven't done a very good job, and historically we've done harm when we thought we were being helpful. And so I am going to get to that and spend just a little bit of time, but it's great to hear what you have to say. Thank you. Yes?
Dr. Duncan, where would you put seasonal affective disorder?
Yeah.
Because I've suffered with that before.
Yeah.
Even though the period of time was short as far as, no rain and,
Yeah.
no sun,
Yeah.
it took me about 6 months to get
Yeah.
that.
I think seasonal affective disorder, which usually comes in the winter months when there's not as much sunshine, or we can go for days without any. That's another biological. It's a biological mood disorder. Let me mention just a couple of things. I know there are a couple of other hands up, and I'll come back to you. But the three that I'm just going to put up here on the screen right now, major depressive disorder. That's kind of what we're talking about. Dysthymic disorder is a little bit less severe. It's still a depressive disorder, a mood disorder, but this is one where the symptoms are a little bit less intense, but it lasts in order to be diagnosed with a dysthymic order, it has to last at least 2 years. And so it's got less intensity, but it's got longer duration, if you'll remember that chart from last week. And then bipolar disorder is also what most commonly is called manic depressive illness. And there's frequently a cycling kind of process where a person can be depressed and then hit a manic mood, and then their psychomotor activity is just elevated and escalated, and then it may come back. But I'll say this about bipolar disorder: there are so many different kinds that just because somebody is up one day and down the next, that doesn't indicate bipolar disorder. There are a lot of other factors. It's really one of the most difficult things to diagnose, one of the most difficult mood disorders to diagnose, because there are so many different kinds. There was a hand up, and so I would put, I guess I'm saying, coming back to seasonal affective disorder, I would put that it is a mood disorder. It is a biological thing, a chemistry-based thing, depending upon the amount of daylight or sunshine and things like that. And so there are lights. There are happy lights. There are fluorescent lights and other kinds of lights that focus on that end of the light spectrum. Hand was up in the back.
I was just going to mention that I was in Long Beach a couple of weeks ago on a business trip and had the opportunity to witness to some homeless people. And you know, from I don't have the medical background that you have, but I see depression as either chemical imbalances. I'm ex-Air Force, and I was actually a cyclist once upon a time and got hit by a car, and I had chronic pain.
Yeah.
And I deal with, I think, never been diagnosed. I mean, but I met this gentleman, and he was actually talking about taking his life. And I think from when you have medical issues like this gentleman did, he in his mind, you know, he really thought that no one cared and no one would miss him, and the world would be better off without him.
Yeah. Yeah.
But,
Yeah.
I tried to tell him that, you know, it's not true, but.
No, and in fact, I think that's a good thing to do, is try to give him the other side of that coin, especially if it's somebody that you know, or a family member or a friend. You know what? You don't have to believe this, but if you are gone, I'm going to miss you. You may not believe me, and it's okay if you don't, but I'm telling you the truth. I have no reason to lie to you about that. But I will miss you, and I will be very, very, very sad. And there are a lot of things you can say. Again, keep in mind the concept of connection at every opportunity that you have. I'm going to go through this next thing very quickly, because this is how you can use it. This is what we use in my office and medical offices to diagnose depression. And so, in order to be qualified, or to be diagnosed with a mood disorder, each of these letters refers to a certain symptom. So the S stands for sleep. You always ask about sleep. So you don't have to be a therapist. You don't have to be a doctor. You can ask a friend. You can ask a family member, hey, how are you sleeping? So initial insomnia is when we have trouble going to sleep. Terminal insomnia, I don't really like that term, but terminal insomnia is when, and I talked with a lady this morning, she said, I don't have any trouble going to sleep. I'm so tired when I lie down in bed, I'm off, but I wake up every night at 2 o'clock or 3 o'clock, and I can't go back to sleep. So not only does she have terminal insomnia, but she also is building up a sleep deficit, and she's sleep deprived every day. That's a very, very important thing to identify. The I stands for interest. Is somebody lost interest in things that they used to be interested in? Have no interest in my job, or have no interest in my family? The things that used to bring me pleasure don't bring me pleasure anymore. And so you can usually read a lot of this on somebody's face when their interest in life is decreased. The G stands for guilt. Frequently, guilt over things that I have nothing to feel guilty about. I didn't do it. Whatever I feel guilty about, it frequently goes with a feeling, a sense, or a belief in my own worthlessness. Some of you have already alluded to that. So sleep, interest, guilt. The E stands for energy, decreased energy. Somebody who can just barely pull themselves up out of bed in the morning. They maybe have had a good night's sleep, and they are so tired, just completely fatigued. The C stands for concentration, difficulty with focus, making decisions, difficulty making decisions. Excuse me. Highly distractible. So people who distractibility can be a part of other things as well, but this would be somebody who just cannot focus on any one thing for very long at a time. The A has to do with appetite or weight increase or decrease. Some people, when they're depressed, they can eat everything in sight, and so they may have gained 10 pounds in the last month or 20 pounds in the last 3 months. Or other people who are depressed, just absolutely their appetite shuts down. And so here's a lady who normally weighs 100 pounds, and over the last 2 months she's lost 10 pounds. She doesn't have 10 pounds to lose. She has not been trying to lose weight. But either a loss of appetite or an increase in appetite. And then the P is psychomotor activity. I alluded to that a minute ago. Somebody, and in bipolar, the psychomotor activity may increase, but in major depressive disorder, the psychomotor activity usually is going to be decreased. Then there's suicidal ideation. Somebody who what that means is, and I always ask the question in my office, have you thought about suicide? I mentioned this a few minutes ago. Have you considered it? Then I want to, if they say yes, then I want to see how specific they have been. If you were to commit suicide, how do you think you would do it? Well, and they may say, I don't know, I hadn't even thought about that. Well, that person is a little safer than the person says, well, you know what I think I would do is I would take a bottle of these pills and I'd take a bottle of these pills. That's pretty specific. Now, they may not have a plan, but if they did, they know what they would do. And then the next question I ask is, you got those pills at home? Do you have access to the means that you would use if you were going to kill yourself? And so with each of those questions, if we get yeses to each of those questions, we call that lethality. Their lethality steadily increases, and to the point where we may have to do something about that. I cannot let a person leave my office if I have a good sense that they are a harm or a danger to themselves or a danger to somebody else. It's not ethical for me to let them leave. But I think you can ask some of the same questions. And you can give people an outlet, somebody to talk to, that they may not have known that they had before you let them know how interested you are. When talking to a new client, also ask about depression in the family. Is there a family history? Mom, dad, especially these first order relatives, mom, dad, brothers and sisters, aunts and uncles, grandparents, because there's good evidence that there is a genetic component to suicide, but to depression and to anxiety. But speaking of suicide, you also want to ask, has anybody in your family ever committed suicide? Because if that's the case, if dad did or if grandfather did, then in some families that demystifies the process. And it may make it a little bit easier for somebody to take that kind of action, even if they haven't ever tried that before. You also ask questions about family. Anybody in your family have a problem with alcohol or a problem with drugs? I think I mentioned this the first time that I was here. So my grandfather may nobody knew that he had depression, but he had an alcohol problem, and it could be that he started using alcohol to mask his depression. Even though alcohol is a depressant, and it doesn't technically make sense to do that, maybe he found out that he felt better or less bad if he was drinking alcohol. He may have developed an alcohol problem, but it may have been to mask depression or anxiety. So we're going to get to the categories here. Just talk very briefly. What's the difference? Well, the two broad categories, the words that I like to use are reactive depression, and the other is endogenous, and I'll show that to you in just a minute. But reactive depression is when we're sad and there is a really good reason for it. You lose a loved one, a relationship breaks up, you lose a job, or any number of crises can happen in life and do happen in life that makes really good sense for you to be down, for you to be, and we use the word depressed, but it's a different kind of depression. Reactive depression is the blues. So everybody has bad days from time to time. It may be due to problems at work, problems at home, financial kinds of situations, relationship situations. For most people, the down periods come and go in a reasonable fashion. Doesn't mean that it's not something to be concerned about. It is something to be concerned about, but it's a very different animal than endogenous depression. So most of us have been through periods of sadness and grief and frustration. And when I say the blues, I don't mean to minimize these feelings, because these things are very, very serious. But it's important to be able to distinguish between reactive depression and endogenous depression. Endogenous usually refers to something that's chemical. We call it clinical depression. It's where you may wake up in the morning and just feel down, but you don't have any reason. And people tell me that there's no reason for me to be depressed. I've got a good family. I've got a wonderful relationship with my spouse. I've got a good job. We live in a nice house, and so there are not any of the major triggers that might trigger the reactive depression. But endogenous depression is when I don't feel good, and I don't know why. Can't figure it out. So I want to share with you, this is something that happened to me a long time ago. It happened to me probably 30 years ago, or maybe even more. It lasted for a very brief period of time. But I will assure you, I don't ever want to feel that way again. Ever. It was during the first year after now I'm thinking I'm going to revise my timeline. It was after I graduated with my counseling degrees at North Texas. That was in 81, so we're talking 35 years ago. Okay, time flies when you're having a good time, right? My wife and I, two small children, we moved to Tennessee upon graduation because that's where both of us had grown up. And with two small children, it just kind of seemed to be a good idea to get the family closer to grandparents, and so we could see them more frequently, and the grandchildren could grow up with them. And so when we moved, when we got to Tennessee, I opened a private counseling practice. Now, I did some other things. I did a little bit of teaching, and I did a little bit of consulting to try to support the family. But most of my income was dependent upon my private practice. And those of you who are or have been self-employed, you know that there's just a certain amount of pressure and stress that goes along with that. And what if my phone doesn't ring? What if nobody walks into my office? There were days back in those days when I'm sitting in my office and I'm doing something, but there's nobody in my office. There's nobody coming in. Phone's not ringing, and so I went to another phone and I called my office phone just to make sure it was still working, because I thought if it's not ringing, it's probably out of order. And I could envision, dozens of clients trying to get through to me, and they're not able to get through to me because my phone's out of order. Well, it wasn't out of order. It was working perfectly. I started experiencing some persistent stress, and most of it, a lot of stress resides in our gastrointestinal tract, okay? It's where a lot of ulcers come from and a lot of GI upset comes from. So I started having some gastrointestinal stuff. Went to the doctor, and he diagnosed me with gastroenteritis. Okay, it's an inflammation of the gastrointestinal system related to stress. He prescribed a medication called Reglan. Never heard of Reglan, but I'm a good patient, and so I go home. First morning, get up out of bed. It's Monday morning. I get up, I shower, and I shave, and I get dressed, take my medication, and then went to my office to see my clients. And through the morning, everything was fine. But then, right before lunch, or right about lunchtime, something happened to me that had never happened before. And I didn't know what it was. I saw my morning clients, but I started feeling weird. How's that for a specific medical diagnosis? Yeah, you have chronic weirdness, all right? I started feeling weird. I started feeling really bad, but nothing hurt. It wasn't pain. Nothing ached, and I couldn't explain it. But I knew I was not in any shape to see my afternoon clients. So I had to reschedule the afternoon clients, which added to my stress because I need to see those people because I've got bills to pay. But what did I do? I went home. I went to bed. I pulled the covers up over my head. It was the only thing I knew to do. I didn't feel like doing anything else. My wife came home, and she was surprised. I never had done that before. She said, "What's wrong?" I said, "I don't know." She was confused. I was confused. I said, "I just feel terrible." "Well, what hurts?" "Nothing hurts." "What do you mean you feel terrible?" I did not have a reasonable explanation for her. I didn't know. I couldn't tell her. Slept through the night. Woke up the next morning. Felt better. Okay, that was really weird. Yesterday was really weird. Get up, shower, shave, get on my clothes, take my medicine, and went to the office to see my clients. By late morning, I began to feel the same way I had felt the previous day. Saw my morning clients, but I had my afternoon clients. I had to reschedule all of them. I was not in shape to see them. It increased my stress one more time. What did I do? I went home. I went to bed. I pulled the covers up over my head, and it was the only thing I knew to do again. Day 3. I wake up. I'm feeling a lot better. I get up. I shower and I shave and I get dressed. I took my medicine. I know I'm a slow learner. I know it. I went to my office to see my clients. You get the drill. Same thing happened. 3 consecutive days. Same results, exact same results. You've already figured it out. One of the side effects of my depression of my medication was depression. And I will promise you, as sure as I'm standing here tonight, it slammed me. Never experienced anything like it before. Never experienced anything like it since. Thank God. It slammed me. And the reason I'm sharing that story with you is to share with you that it was chemical. It was absolutely chemical. It wasn't about being emotionally weak. It wasn't about being spiritually weak. Didn't have anything to do with it. My faith didn't have anything to do with it. And it was debilitating. And I mean that literally. It took me out. When I say it took me out of contact, disconnection, took me out of contact with everybody. My wife, my 2 small children. I didn't want to be with anybody. Took me out of contact with my clients. It took me out of contact with everybody. And here's one of the most important things I can tell you. Mine was very brief, 3 days. 3 days is a drop in the bucket compared to a lot of people who suffer from major depression, major clinical depression. But here's what I want you to know. I was a strong person. I'm a strong person today. I was a strong person then. I could not pull myself out of it. I was unable, physically, emotionally, spiritually, to pull myself out of it. As I said, I don't ever want to feel that way again, ever. But one of the things my experience has done is given me an empathy with people who suffer from clinical depression. It's one of the worst things I've ever been through before. If you have not ever experienced that, then thank God that you haven't. But like I said earlier, you can still connect with people who do have that problem and who are living with that challenge. You may have noticed last week another thing that happened in the news. I say I've gone on a news fast, but I certainly know a lot that was in the news, right? A recommendation was made by a government-appointed health panel that women undergo depression screening, routine screening for depression during pregnancy and after giving birth. Why? Chemistry, hormones. It's about chemistry. Clinical depression is about chemistry, and it isn't about being emotionally weak, and it isn't about faith. Have you got that message there? Do I need to say that again? It's about chemistry. That's why mental illness, I say with great confidence, is medical illness. Now, there are some depressions that are fairly simple to treat, and there are some that are not. And like you said, Connie, about Rusty Rose, yeah, somebody in his shoes had access to the best resources, the best medical resources, the best medicines, and was never able to find that. Fortunately, the more difficult to treat depressions are in a fairly small percentage of the population. But if you got it, it's 100%. You know, if you're one of those people, you're in the 100%. So, depression poses a lot of risks. So, yeah, risks for accidental injury. So you may not be intending to do harm to yourself, but you may accidentally injure yourself. You may do self-harm that is not suicidal. Cutting behaviors are an example of that, and suicide. Also, depression results in a suppressed immune system that weakens the body and makes us all more susceptible to physical ailments and chronic illness. So then, when you add drugs and alcohol to the mix, then it exacerbates all risks. So you can see it's a very complex set of circumstances, causes and effects that can result in some really, really bad stuff. I'm going to kind of skip through a couple of points here very quickly. Okay. Depression and faith. Oh, no, I'm sorry. Skipped ahead of myself. Depression is a thief. I read an article with that title, and it just is absolutely true. It steals everything. It steals your passion, your joy. It steals your enthusiasm. It steals your relationships, even your relationship with God. Depression can steal that. It actually steals you. It makes it not possible to be who you really are and how you were really intended to live your life. Depression steals the most precious parts of your life. And that's, you can't oversay how serious that is. Just briefly, depression and faith. This could be an entire series in itself, and I don't intend to. I believe that there are many examples of people in the Bible who were depressed. I'm not going to go into that now because I'm not prepared to. But there's some good evidence to that effect. And one of the things I love about the Bible is the Bible doesn't pull any punches. You know, the Bible tells us the good, the bad, and the ugly. And you can see it all. You can see it all in King David, for one thing. You know, the good and the bad and the ugly. And you read the Psalms and you can see how he just agonized with his guilt. His was a deserved guilt, of course. But when we talk about depression and faith, I want to emphasize this. Please, 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 don't ever say to a depressed person. This is just a few of many things that we should never say to a depressed person. Please don't ever say, real Christian can't have depression. People say that. People believe that. And they don't mean harm when they say that. But they can do great harm without meaning to. Don't ever say a true Christian, a real Christian, can't have depression. It's not true. Don't ever say, just pull yourself out of it. I'm here to testify to you that if anybody could have pulled myself out of it, I could have done that. Could not possibly do that. Don't say that. So maybe you're going from your own experience. If you've been sad about something, maybe you've been able to pull yourself out of it, and that's okay, and that's good for you. But don't assume that somebody who's clinically depressed is going to be able to do that. We can do much more harm than good. Don't ever say God is enough. Even though it's true, God is enough. I'm not arguing with that statement. But He provides. But He also gives us a brain to think with. You probably don't expect God to heal your broken arm without going to a hospital or a doctor and getting it set. God heals. But He uses other people to help healing. I wear contact lenses. I don't expect God to heal my vision without some medical help. God is enough, but don't use that as a blanket statement that implies that if you were really the kind of person that you ought to be, you wouldn't be having this problem. Don't ever say, just pray and read your Bible more. Even though, of course, I need to pray more. I need to read my Bible more. And maybe everybody does. But don't say that to a clinically depressed person as if that's the cure. It's not the cure. Now, it's a really important factor. You do want to pray. And you do want to connect. Speaking of connection, you want to connect with God. You want to connect with good people that you can trust. But don't say these things. Don't say these things ever, or I will come and get you. I don't know how I'm going to find out, but if I hear that any of you have said these things, I'll get you.
What if the depressed person is saying that to themselves?
Yeah. That's where I think we can help re-educate. A big part of what happens in a counseling office is re-education, because people come in with all kinds of erroneous thoughts and irrational thoughts. And, if I were the kind of Christian I need to be, this wouldn't be happening. And we can help dispel them of that thought. That's not a true thought. It's not a rational thought. But your point is well made. A lot of times the depressed person will be saying this to themselves. Other people don't have to say it because they're already telling themselves that. Okay, very quickly. I keep saying very quickly, don't I? But I'm not being very quick about it. I want you to write this guy's name down, because he is one of the leaders over probably the last 15 or 20 years in a movement called positive psychology. His name is Martin Seligman, psychologist. And I want to put his picture up here because he's smiling. Now, Seligman is noteworthy because he started his professional career studying depression. Can you imagine that? That's all he studied for like 20 years, depression. But in his studies of depression, he learned some really, really important things. And he's written some very important books. Seligman has written about learned helplessness.
Helplessness or hopelessness?
Helplessness. No, hopelessness.
No, this is helplessness.
Okay.
Yeah, this is learned. I've got to tell you. Do you mind one quick little story? So Seligman, one of his experiments was that he would have a cage, a wire mesh cage with an electrical grid on the bottom of it. Now, this was back in the 60s. You can't experiment with dogs like this anymore. For some reason, people frown on that. He'd put a dog in the cage. That's a dog. And then he would send a very, very mild electrical shock into the grid. The dog would yelp and jump, but there was nowhere to go. This was just a four-sided cage. And so he would remove the electrical shock and then wait a few minutes, send another shock. The dog would yelp and jump. And then after a few times, the dog stopped yelping and stopped jumping. There was nothing he could do. So he was helpless against being shocked. Then what Seligman did was he transferred that same dog to another cage that was identical to the other, except this one had a little balcony. It had an upper room where if the dog wanted to, he could jump up into that room. There was no electrical grid up there, and he could escape the electrical shock. Puts him in the new cage, electrical shock. What did the dog do? Didn't do anything. He sat down and he took it. Even though there was a way of escape, the dog had learned from the other cage that he was helpless to escape. So even when there was a means of escape, he didn't take it. What Seligman realized very, very clearly is that humans do that too. If we're subjected to really negative situations over and over and over again, there's nothing we can do about it. At some point, we'll stop trying. And that's the whole concept of learned helplessness. So he found a connection between depression and learned helplessness. He thought if people learn to be helpless, he also wrote a book called Learned Pessimism, that I didn't write up here. If people can learn to be pessimistic, you remember I've told you, one of the things I ask in my office is, where did you learn to do that? Where did you learn that? If I think that I'm supposed to please everybody in the world, I become a people pleaser, where did I learn that? That's a really important question. So Seligman realized if people can learn pessimism, hey, you know what? They can also learn optimism. And this is where the kind of the positive psychology movement began. He wrote a book just 2 or 3 years ago called Flourish. He's written a book called What You Can Change and What You Can't. He's a really, really bright guy and writes in a very practical way. He has a talk on TED.com on positive psychology. So if you want to get a little first-hand experience to Seligman, then that would be one place to go. As always, let me stop this just a second.
People affected by depression
Hang
worldwide.
on,
It's
hang
no
on,
doubt
hang
an
on.
incredibly real
Hang
and
on.
serious issue. But
Okay.
with over 350 million people,
The video is called The Science of Depression.
but what exactly is going on inside?
One of the things we can do is to familiarize ourselves with the science of depression.
Hey there, welcome to Life Noggin. I may appear to be happy and animated all the time, pun intended, but some days I fall into a slump. We all do, it's a part of life. These feelings are real, and the effects aren't always just mental. You can actually feel them in a physical sense too. But how? And why? Let's find out. Depression can be the result of a chemical imbalance in the noggin. Chemicals called neurotransmitters aid in sending messages to different nerve cells in your brain. Some neurotransmitters can control your mood. When you're depressed, these neurotransmitters might not be functioning properly, causing severe changes in mood. Depression can be caused by things like stressful life events, certain medications, death of a loved one, hormonal changes, and of course caused by faulty mood regulation in the brain. One part of the brain affected by depression is called the hippocampus. The hippocampus processes long-term memory and recollection. It also registers fear, and it's actually smaller in people with depression. Ongoing exposure to stress impairs nerve cell growth in this part of the brain. Not only can depression have you feeling down, but it can actually physically affect parts of your body other than the brain. Chronic fatigue, insomnia, oversleeping, and general aches and pain are just a few examples. Pain threshold can be altered by abnormal functioning of the brain's neurotransmitters like serotonin, making people with depression more sensitive to pain. Another interesting physical change that can come with depression is eyesight. Recent studies show that the retinas of depressed patients were actually less sensitive to contrast. Contrast vision relies on cells that in turn rely on dopamine. People with depression are often shown to have less dopamine, which is important for drive and attention. These findings are still relatively new, but very interesting. One unfortunate problem that comes with depression is the fact that it can actually increase your risk of physical illness. Stress hormones are increased, which can lead to more problems. When we're stressed, our immune system's ability to fight off antigens or foreign bodies is reduced, making it more difficult to fight off infections. Corticosteroid, a stress hormone, can actually suppress the overall effectiveness of the immune system by lowering the amount of lymphocytes, which are cells that destroy the body's invading viruses. Did you know that seasons can actually affect your mood? It's called seasonal affective disorder. When there's less daylight, your brain can increase neurotransmitters like melatonin. More daylight and your brain will produce more serotonin. In the fall and the winter, where there are shorter days and less daylight, your body might produce less serotonin and more melatonin. This imbalance can set up the brain for depression in some people who react to seasonal changes. Exposure to more light can help people maintain this chemical balance. If you or someone you know is depressed, please seek help immediately. You can check the links below for some online resources. Going to the doctor, seeing a therapist, and thinking positively can work wonders, so please don't be afraid to get out there and ask for help. What are some things in life that make you happy? Let's set up a positivity train in the comments. If you see someone with a similar interest in the comments, strike up a conversation. Or you can simply tell us, what should we talk about next? And if you want even more Life Noggin, check out this episode on the science of happiness and follow us on Facebook and Twitter. Links are below. I'm Blocko. This has been Life Noggin. Don't forget to keep on thinking.
Get suppressed. I'm almost finished. What can we do? We can understand as much as we can about the science of depression. Consult a physician, and I'll add to that, if you know somebody, if you're a good friend of somebody who is depressed, you may say, you got to go talk to a doctor. Yeah, I know. You may need to take them. You may need to physically help them get to a doctor because of all the symptoms they may not want to or may not have the energy to. As we talked last week, cultivating healthy behaviors, recognizing irrational, self-defeating thoughts and beliefs, replacing them with healthy thoughts. Talk to somebody you can trust. Help your friend talk to somebody that they can trust. It may be a family member, it may be a friend, it may be a pastor or a wife of a pastor or a professional therapist. But just that contact, that connection with somebody else who can understand to the best of their ability, can understand that is going to be helpful. Thank you for your patience with me, and I hope I haven't imposed on your time in such a way. We got 3 more lessons in this series. Next week, we're going to be talking about managing anger and fear. But then I thought, why are we doing that? Because Christians don't have those problems, right? I may be the only one here next week because this is just not going to be relevant to you. Managing anger and fear. 2 weeks from now, staying connected with the Father, and then 3 weeks, staying connected with each other. Let's briefly pray, please. Father, thank you so very much for being here with us tonight, enabling us to be here. And thank you for the information that you are helping us to learn and that you're revealing to us about how you have made us. Father, thank you for the connection that you have with us, and help us to know without any doubt that there's nothing we can do that will cause you to stop loving us. That's not within our power to push you away from us. Father, thank you for blessing us with family and friends who are supportive and help us to be more understanding of those people we know who suffer from these disorders. In Jesus' name, amen. Thank you again. Thank you very much for being here.